Hello, welcome back. Nice to have you here. And I was talking today. I want to talk about um, when I was living in the little old house. Um, Lots of things went on, but as you have to, remember, I was very young then. I was about 5 when we moved up to two bungalows that my grandfather had sold the land to the council so that they could build the houses on the land, but the houses were still belonging to the council. So there was one more thing that kind of, it's trauma, but it just kind of stuck out in my head about the old house. Not having a bathroom was hard, not having those facilities. I don't know how we managed because I was so young. And then the size of the house being so small, with two families living in it. But I don't know, like I said, my mother had mental health issues, and I don't know exactly what was wrong. But I do remember an occasion, my eldest sister. I had two sisters and I had two brothers, and I have a stepsister. And my mother lost two children at birth when I was older. I was in my teens. Uh, God rest their souls. But one night, it seems, because I used to just stand around the place, because you have to remember I was just a small little child. There was a commotion, and I knew my mother had lost her temper with my sister, my eldest sister. And it seems that from what I was told that my sister was hit on the top of the head with a heel of a shoe and it bled. So that led to my mother not going out because of, you know, serious situation that, you know, and losing her temper like that. It shouldn't have happened. Children should not be subjected to violence of that kind. So that was that, and I remember being very shocked about that. I think that would have been my first experience of trauma, you know. So to follow on from there, the two bungalows that the county council built, and my grandfather sold them the land. Um, we moved into them, but it seems I didn't move in with my mother. I must have moved with my grandfather because later on, I don't know, my grandfather was ill, and later on, I'll have to think. Yeah, later on, like when we moved into the two bungalows, I do remember my grandfather being very ill. And I do remember I used to sleep with my grandfather when I was little because I would feel his beard, you know, and he was daddy to me. He was my daddy. And I feel his beard to know, if I woke up at night to crawl in beside him. And in the new houses, in the new house, the bungalow, which my sisters were in the next door one, I remember one day he was laid out in this brown, it looked like a monk's robe, you know, and he had this prayer book under his chin. And I remember being told that was to keep his mouth closed. And of course, being that young, that was more trauma to me, you know. I remember the funeral. I remember people calling to the house. I remember us being dressed in navy. And I questioned it later because for some reason in my head, I thought it was disrespect not to be dressed in black. And I don't know why I thought that way, you know. Maybe I was just brought up that way. And that was sad. He was my rock. And he passed when I was just maybe 6, 7, but uh, probably more closer to 7 because the trauma I went to hypnotherapy. The trauma in it started when I was 8 that I remembered back the serious trauma. And when I was about 8. But the thing was, when you're that young, you don't remember. It comes back to you. The little bits come back to you. But I do remember I had moved actually next door and in with my sisters to try and maybe, two houses we would be separated then because we had aunts and my grandmother, and we would be separated, each to our own home. So I do remember him. We would go to Sunday Mass, and we always had to wear these hats going to Sunday Mass, and I don't think any of us liked them. But he would bring us into the shop, the sweet shop, and he would say to us, Grandad would say, pick out whatever you want, but you can have one item, one packet, one item. And he'd say, pick out whatever you want. But every day when I lived then when I had moved with my sisters into that house, he would go down the village, as my brother called it, and I used to laugh later because we used to call it down the bridge. Don't know, it was the old bridge was the name of the place, but we would call it the bridge. And he would always bring me up a packet of crisps, which were called Perry at the time back in those days. And I love my packet of crisps, I still do, because of him. And I remember one day he hid them behind his back and said, didn't get you any crisps today. And I remember, sulking, you know, and then he took them out from behind his back. He was he was my daddy. But he would babysit us. That's what I remember. He would babysit us for our mother. Our mother used to go out, you know, socialising at night. And we'd be running around. Well, I wasn't really running around, but the rest of them were running around, and my brother around the kitchen table, and he'd be saying, quieten down, Willie, and all that kind of thing. And he was a great man. And that's why I love talking about him, because he was the positivity in my life. I thought every man would be like my grandfather, but boy, Was I going to get a wake up call? That's how things, I suppose, did go wrong, because I thought every man would be like my granddad, you know. So patching it together, I like, as I said there, I thought everyone would be like my granddad when I grew up, but no, that's not the way it turned out. Um, when he died, you know, again, number two, I, you know that. So my sisters had each other because my middle sister had my older sister, and then my brother ended up in some sort of a Borstal school for running away. My mother would bring him to school, but he wouldn't sit there. As soon as my mother left the school, he'd be back out the door. So the school guard back in those days would come up to my mother, and be demanding that my brother would be in school. And there was nothing really my mother could do, only bring him to school and, leave to go home, and he'd be out the door. So what do you do? She lived in the countryside. She didn't have a car, you know. She didn't have a bicycle. She didn't have anything. So, you know, life was hard back then. But yeah, we moved into that house anyway, and Granddad babysat us. Then I had an aunt that babysat us, and she had yeah, she had dogs. She liked to have dogs. She used to go downtown with these dogs, and the dogs, she'd be training the dogs to do what she wanted. Uh, I remember there was times when she babysat us, and I remember being very scared because they would be, say, a German Shepherd, and if we moved, she would tell the dog, "Get us," um, and of course, terrified, because you can imagine a German Shepherd, you know, and if you moved, that dog would go for you. So that gave me trauma. Then it gave me a fear of dogs. Even though there was plenty of dogs at home, but there was a certain breed of dogs that I was scared of. Um, it had placed that seed in me, you know, for fear. I had a lot of fear around dogs. Um, my grandmother was a strict woman, very stern, strict woman. I couldn't see any love for her grandchildren in her. Um, I used to help her a lot when I was young. I would sew boots for the factory that she would get, and I would be out late sewing boots in her house next door. And my mother would be calling me because I would have to come in, go to bed, and get up for school the next day. Um, yeah, that shouldn't have happened either. I was a child. I lost my childhood. I never had a childhood, except for Grandad, up to the 5 years, you know. But I have, like, when you're that young, you don't remember a lot of things. I do, you know, as I say, try to be very positive about things. But it's my way of coping with life. I'm a strong person now. You know, back then I wasn't a strong person. I was a little child, an innocent little child that had lost everything by losing her granddad, her dad. and the mother tried her best, I suppose, because she had the mental illness. Um, I remember her first breakdown when I was 8 years old, and we were sent in to our grandmother's while she was in hospital. And the grandmother was so strict. If you reached, I remember reaching across the table in the kitchen, and I got whacked with the handle of a saw knife. A saw knife is for, the one of those little ridges all along it for cutting bread, thick bread. And she whacked me on the knuckles, and I didn't know what I had done wrong, but she told me, don't reach across the table, ask for it to be passed. Imagine a small child, you know, just putting their hand out to get something, and she whacked me. Now, these saw knives, were heavy. There was a big wooden piece on the end of it, on the handle. The handle was made of wood. And by God, when you got whacked with that, you knew it down on your knuckles. But I'd sow boots with her. Then she grew her own vegetables out the back. And the old house was kind of just left there, idle. And then she would have hay for cow and calves and things like that. And yeah, we would have to work down the back of the bungalow, bring up, pull up roots of potatoes, stalks. She'd say, go down the back and bring me up a bucket of potatoes. So I did that, and so did my sisters. But I don't remember her being a nice woman. She wasn't a nice woman. She was a bitter woman. She was a bitter woman, and she didn't love her grandkids, because I remember when I was in her house, in the bungalow, when my grandfather had passed and I was getting older, that she would I remember her. She also hit my sister when my mother was in hospital, because she wasn't ready for mass at the time that she wanted her to be ready at, and wearing what she wanted her to wear. So she got this piece of a stick, plenty of sticks in the countryside, I tell you, and she started whacking my sister around the place with it. My sister was so upset, and that was brushed under the carpet. It was traumatic, you know. She had no right to hit my older sister, and it would explain a lot of things with my sister then, probably when she got older, why she was behaving the way she was. And that would lead us down the next road. So this is part of me now after moving in with my mother, and my mother saying to me one day, and it's always stuck in my head for my whole life. There was a brick wall between the houses, the two bungalows, and a shed in the middle, and then a small wall that you could just throw your leg over and go into the next bungalow. But my mother used to do that. But she said to me when I was young, I went in and I took you back. And I remember just looking at her like, not understanding. What do you mean? I didn't say that. I wouldn't talk. Um, I just was in fear of her. And to me, granted, I was lost. And yeah, she said she took me back over the wall, meaning, as I gathered later in life, that she took me back off of Grandad. You know, she started taking care of me per se after Grandad had died, which I probably would have been still with him if he had been, alive longer. And we leave it there for now, and I'll continue with the next part of the story. Mind yourselves and look after yourselves. And this is my story.